final speaker on this panel is Professor Zhu Feng, who teaches international studies and is also Deputy Director of the Center for International and Strategic Studies at Peking University. He's a Senior Research Fellow at the China Institute of Peace and Development and the Center for Contemporary World Affairs. He has written extensively about security issues in East Asia, the North Korea nuclear issue, U.S. national security strategy, Sino-American relations, and recently published a book entitled The Past, Present, and Future of China-Japan Military-to-Military Exchange and Cooperation. So, Professor Zhu Feng.
Thank you, Professor Perry. It's truly my honor coming and then joining you for this brilliant panel discussion. So let me also use this chance to express my salute for Liz for her great achievement in China studies. I think it's truly very, very important. I think a moment for me to say something following through Perry Lee's vision. My topic is about the China and how China could learn to be a great power. Let me starting with some sort of brief definition of learning in international relations. I think basically we have two sort of international relations theory describing the learning and its effect to the state behavior. One is we call some sort of learning theory based on liberalist assumptions. For example, when a social actor just getting increasingly adaptive to international norm and behavior, actually it's a process of socialization. So then learning is very roughly and also very simply to the process of a socialization. I think the other one is we can also think about is some sort of a cultural theory of learning. That means, for example, a social actor and interacting with the others and such a self-others image building, or we say some sort of a social construction usually could become a leading source to get that actor to just follow, like international norms and just behaving and acting on international expectation. So my view is this: if we look at China, I prefer to use the formal one, such as socialization could prove to be a leading force to get a social unit just a more adaptive and a more well-fitting some sort of international norm and international institutions. So then I think if we look at China, such a socialization is very, very helpful to not just reshape the China's international image, but also could help just getting the China's international behavior more adaptive to international norm and international demands. Yes, if you look at the China's history, I think the central piece of Chinese culture is always learning. It's a Confucius doctrine. So for Confucius, I think learning is lifestyle. Learning is not just a way to get yourself just growing up. So such a being lifestyle of learning theory always emphasize learning could turn into incarnation of some sort of ethical, requests. But such a learning now is losing the ground. So for today's China, if we can become more contributing and more welcome in international context, it's not the incarnation of some sort of a self-serving ethical demand. It should be some sort of a steady way for China to win hot and sour in the world. I think it's a big challenge for today's China. If we look at some sort of the material statistics, you will find China now is a rising power. Maybe it's still very regional, but it's of global reach. But if we're turning on to the China's international influence, you will see a lot of controversies. For example, I think a recent criticism is very concentrating on China's being assertiveness of some sort of such a foreign relations or foreign policy. So how to get China more populous and more welcome? I think it's not some sort of the way China could getting increasingly internationalized, but it's also some sort of a drive behind the China state behavior. So we were not just being stronger, we should also be popular and welcome. So for that point, I think learning is a leading force to get China, to the new and high level. So how to learn for my country? Of course, it's a very, very complicated question, but my view is that learning to get China better is, we say, two-track process. On the one hand, we should also undercut some sort of, we say, the obsolete, untransformed domestic constraint. For example, China's ideology. Everybody knows China has been completely transformed in economic terms. So where whatever the Japanese model, Korean model, we should just follow up. But I think that China is very typically capitalist system, just with Chinese character. We never just concede China is a socialist or communist system anymore. But on the other hand, if we look at China's domestic political settings, we will see a lot of such a untransformed or fail to transformed such a constraint from the Chinese political system. One is ideology. Yes, we still say we're a socialist country. Our university students still receive a lot of such course lecturing about Chinese Marxist theory, Mao Zedong thoughts, and the Deng Xiaoping theory. I can't say such a lecturing will be nothing, but actually they do a little effects for Chinese young students to think through the China's future. So then we needed to update the China's ideology, make the official discourse as open as we can. So we should recognize, I think in today's world, China's democratization may just, follow in the Chinese way, but we needed to offer some sort of Chinese aspiration to come after such a transformation. So ideology, we need to change. We needed to get it completely updated. The second, we also needed to rebuild the domestic consensus on how to look at the world in general and the relations with U.S. in particular. For example, there's a lot of some sort of, U.S. conspiracy theory in China. Many Chinese just assumed as China is rising, the U.S. will be fighting back and also probably will impeding China from just growing as fast as we can. So then such a U.S. conspiracy or Western conspiracy probably also lead to some sort of the Chinese, my view is misperception on how world could evolve with the China's development. So then if such a domestic consensus always being in some sort of such a vulnerable thinking, then China's rise inevitably just hitting some sort of a power rivalry with the U.S. Then we will have a very fully self-fulfilling, we say, the mindset, just like U.S. is the enemy. So then China will take the U.S. as the enemy. So such a formula will completely misleading the China's future's policy outcome. If we look back to the 90s, we always warn the United States, don't take the China as the enemy. But today, a stronger China would tend to see the U.S. as the enemy, or we need some sort of enemy like the United States, then it will help China to consolidate the domestic power base, I think such a question, we should offer a very clear-cut answer. So then, domestic ideological updates and the reconstruction of social, we say, consensus on the international relations are two leading aspects of China's learning progress on domestic domain. But if we turn to the international domain, I think we also have to learn a lot from our Asian neighbors. I think one of the key lessons for us is China's future will be more like the past of Asian politics. That question is also very, I think, striking to our Asian neighbors. For example, ASEAN countries are very skeptical. China's new power aspiration will definitely came down to some sort of history model of China's regional supremacy. It's a Sinocentrism. Then our Japanese friends always skeptical China may fall into the footprint of the imperialist Japan. Then the Beijing will also getting, for example, some sort of militarily monarchy and such a militarism while hitting the China's policy, then China probably becomes some sort of a second imperialist of Japan, challenging the U.S., shaking the international liberal order, and also inevitably contesting with the U.S. for supremacy. So then Japanese friends always assumed that if China could not offer the transparency and the democratization, then Japan's worry of China will be well warranted in coming days. I think that such a fear probably is also one of the leading factors behind the Japan-China tensions. So then we needed to tell our Japanese friends. So today's China could very credibly avoid some sort of duplication of such a very lousy, very violent historical mistakes imperialist Japan once made. But the problem is in what way? Then we also should learn from the South Korean. I think China and the Korean enjoy a lot of historical similarity. But why the Korean could very impressively and very decisively go through their relatively short transformation of democratization. For example, from end of the 80s to early 90s, maybe it's just took the Korean less than 6 years to finish some sort of such a very steady, I think, robust democratic transformation. For many Chinese elites, they always think about the Singapore model. It's some sort of a strongman politics ruled economic taking off and social development. But the problem is what sort of historical clues we can truly learn from the Korean's transformation. So for me, I think it's very illuminating and very encouraging. So China should come after the Korean to show our courage just finishing our domestic transformation. Then we can also learn a lot from India. For example, India has the 2 aircraft carriers. India spent a lot of money in their weapon purchase programs. But why there is a little internationally echoed India threat? When China just has built the first nascent aircraft carrier, it's just, in my eyes, just a sitting deck because there is no on-deck J fighters. But why now the China threat is just booming up? So what sort of soft power components we can sincerely learn from our India friends? I think the leading, the interpretation of a less clamorous India threat is India is big democracy. So then the big democracy could just automatically rid China of such a fear and worries? At least it's one of the alternatives we should have in mind. So let me get back to my conclusion. Today, China is adolescent power. When I referring to the adolescent, I just definitely mean China's internationalization and socialization remain very limited. So we needed to overcome a lot of Chinese self-serving mindset, just like, for example, historical grievance and history-driven exceptionalism, and get China take a more serious look at what's the image we can build and what sort of strengths we should use. If China could just do that through sincere learning process, I think China will be getting better, and we can also just jump over as high as we can. Thanks.
Thank you very much.